He is a filmmaker, a screenwriter, a podcast host, and of course, he also worked on the massively successful new film Obsession. It is our great pleasure to welcome in today Jeff Barker. Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing great. I appreciate that interview. At no point did you say Curry Barker's dad, which recently that's it. It stops right there.
Not a
Well,
bad thing.
Yeah, which I'm very proud of. Very proud of. Very proud of.
well, Jeff, you do have a lot going on beyond just obviously we're going to get into Obsession a little bit, but obviously you're a very very busy guy. When did you get involved in filmmaking? Like when did you get involved in screenwriting? Because you've been at it for a while, and I was looking at your website. Like you have a long list of awards, things you've done in screenwriting. So like when did you get involved in the film industry?
Yeah, ironically enough, it was Obsession that brought me into it because I was a writer for 25 years, writing short stories and novels, manuscripts, and I had a lot, about 20 something short stories that were published in literary journals and magazines. And so I was sort of like the resident writer of the family. And then when Curry, I was always interested in screenwriting, but it was never an option before because in the past you had to live in LA to be in the screenwriting game. And but when Curry started Obsession and he was having some issues and he came to me and he was like, Dad, can you help me with some of this stuff? And I really dove into it so that I could be of help and started studying screenwriting. And I was like, wow, this is exactly what I was meant to do because I write cinematically. I try to avoid interiority as much as possible. Like it's sort of like perfectly, made for me to write that way. And so, yeah, we worked on Obsession, and then I started writing screenplays and living here on the coast. If you don't, I didn't know anybody, so I was like, well, only thing I can do is put some stuff on the blacklist. Put some stuff in some screenplay competitions, and things went really well. I did really well in those areas, and it opened up some doors for me. And so, yeah, it's been about 3 years of exclusively, writing screenplays, and I was able to, quit my job and do this full time, and it's been amazing. And Obsession's opening up even more doors for everyone in our family. We're just so grateful.
You're somebody with a multidisciplinary background, and it's something that's weird. I think in any other industry, when somebody's like, "Oh, I've been this, I've been that, I've done this, and I've done that on a full-time basis," that puts up a red flag in any other industry. This is one of the few industries where tons of other experience, and I've taught everybody I ever talked to, they've done a million different things. You're one of those guys that has a lot of experience in completely different fields. And when you jump into screenwriting, what jumped out at you first, coming from all those different industries,
Yeah.
jumping into the world of screenwriting?
Well, I was a news anchor for 9 years, and I was in photography for a while, 7, 8 years, and then I got into psychiatry and did that as a psychiatric nurse practitioner for 9 years. That is the one that really has had the hugest impact because really digging deep into psychology and trauma and just truly understanding the human condition and also too, when the boys were growing up, just constantly talking about those things because I didn't want them to be afraid of. I mean, they were of age that they knew I was going to work at the psych hospital. I was seeing people who were in crisis, who were having psychosis and difficulties. And I didn't want them to be scared for me or scared, of any of that. So I really, helped to talk about it a lot at home. That this is what's happening. These are the symptoms, and Curry and I have talked recently about how important that was, for all the boys coming up. But yeah, I think it's had a huge impact on my screenwriting. In fact, when I first met with a showrunner at one point, I was almost apologizing about, that I'm coming to screenwriting professionally so late in the game. And she had said, no, this is a gift that you have all of this experience that you could bring to a writer's room or to whatever project you're working on that the people may not have. So I've started thinking about it differently, and I'm very thankful that I had those experiences.
Can I ask? I'm curious because, like, like we all know Obsession is like an incredibly successful horror film. You seem like a horror fan though, because I was looking at your website. You have a lot. So I assume like growing up, you were a horror fan.
Oh yeah, I've always loved horror. Definitely like psychological horror, elevated horror, if you want to call it that. But horror that has themes and a purpose. It's not, not just like running around, from a hacksaw. And those have value too. The horror popcorn movies. But what I write, what really resonates with me is when the guilt or the trauma, or the grief is so overwhelming for the character that it starts to manifest this way externally in some sort of a horror. And that's the stuff that I mostly write. I also write comedy, because horror and comedy just goes so well together. I actually wrote a buddy comedy for Cooper and Curry, and they're both interested in it, but their lives are pretty much planned out for the next 4 or 5 years here. So
They might be a little busy for
that's
least the
right.
next
Yeah.
four.
They've outgrown that, that's for sure.
On the topic though of psychology and writing and horror, I would say the last 10 years of horror have been actually phenomenal. Like I think about really right around the time Hereditary came out, which I know was a huge influence to Curry for this movie, but psychological examination of trauma has become, I would say, the number one pillar of
Mhm.
most horror movies now. And with someone like yourself with a psychological background, why do you think that is? Why do you think that trend has come towards sort of dealing with, excising, and examining trauma in horror? Why do you think now more than ever it's become such a it's really come out to the forefront?
Well, I think because when people want to invest their time and watch a movie, they want to feel something. They want to walk away and be thinking about it and see how it applies to them and their lives. And that's one of the reasons why Obsession has been so successful. And people are going back to see it a second, third time because it's resonating with some of these deep-seated sort of cultural issues, especially Gen Z is going through. But yeah, I think that because horror can go there in ways that other genres can't, sometimes a straight drama will really work and hit. Like I think about Manchester by the Sea or Jesse Eisenberg's movie that came out a couple of years ago. And so, yeah, it doesn't have to be horror, but horror can just go there in places and really force you to dissect things in ways that other genres can't. And because of that freedom and because of the rising popularity of people being open to experiencing these movies, that's why you're starting to see the popularity go up. And I love it. I just think it's great. You're right. The Barker household's always been a horror household. We weren't afraid to show the kids movies. Of course, we want to be responsible about it. Wait till they got to a certain age, but we didn't shy away from it when the time came.
You
Yeah, now
mentioned
there's YouTube and my kids are watching the horror, whether I
Yeah,
know it or not.
right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
you mentioned obviously you do horror. Obviously, horror is a big part of it. You also mentioned comedies, and it's so funny because the relationship between comedy and horror is so much bigger than anyone thinks about now. You think about the Philippou brothers who did Talk to Me. They were YouTube creators making comedy videos, and you think about and obviously Curry was doing comedy fun, like guys coming from sketch comedy back. What is it about that relationship? Because I've heard actors say like comedy and horror are the two hardest things to do because you have to be funny or you have to act afraid, and not every actor can do it. Like there's some actors who
Right.
openly said, "I won't do a horror film because I know I'm not going to look right when I'm trying to act scared," or "I can't do a comedy because I can't be funny." But it's so weird. Like there's such a dichotomy now between horror and comedy now, where like our best horror creators are coming from comedy backgrounds.
Yeah. Well, it's like when Jordan Peele says the only difference between horror and comedy is the music, because it's really about the setup and the payoff, setup and the payoff. Like it's really, you're doing a magic trick. Especially even with joke writing, like you're misdirecting. You're making the reader or the viewer feel like you're going one direction and then you're going another. And if it's predictable, then it's not funny. But if they can surprise you, but there's some truth or reality to it, oh, I get it, then that's what's funny. And it's the same thing with horror. Like, yeah, there are so many predictable tropes, but the ones that really scare people, the ones that really make the hair rise up on the back of your neck is when you weren't expecting it. Even after the fact, you realize, okay, I can see how we got there. That makes sense. But at the moment, the misdirection had you looking a different way, thinking a different way. And that's why people really don't care that much about jump scares anymore. I mean, there's a place for them because it's exciting, but really the jump scare is sort of, especially for the sophisticated audience, it's like, okay, we've experienced that enough, and it is fun, but we want you to surprise us in an intellectual way, something that we didn't see coming, we weren't expecting. And in our household, Key and Peele was on every day, every day. I mean, just because that was the time when the boys were teenagers, and it was in its prime. And I think we've seen every sketch 3 or 4 times at least. Curry tells a story about when he first met Keegan Michael Key at some premiere event, and he walked up to him. And this was Curry was nobody really knew at all who Curry was, but he walked up to Keegan Michael Key and he said, "Hey, I just wanted to meet you and tell you that it's your fault that I'm funny." And so they've hit it off, and they've stayed, acquaintances since then. I don't think he's met Jordan Peele yet. He's waiting for that day because he's a huge influence and a hero of his, and that'll be special. I know as soon as he does, he'll be texting me telling me that he met him.
I'm sure that day is coming soon. And that's a great, you really nailed something there that I think like we've been searching for a while, because you got Zach Kreger, you've got Jordan Peele and now Curry. The idea that there's a mechanical similarity between comedy and horror. So it comes much more naturally to comedic storytellers. That's something I haven't heard yet, so I'm
Oh,
glad you
really?
brought that.
Yeah. Well,
I hadn't really heard that yet.
oh, okay. Yeah. Curry and I talk about that a lot. And, I know he's been saying that on his press tour because he gets that question a lot as well. But yeah, yeah, you could definitely see it. It translates well. And another thing I think people appreciate about Obsession is that it's funny. It's not a horror comedy, but there are moments in there of comedic relief to sort of take the anxiety and the pressure off. Because if it's an hour and a half or hour and 45 minutes of just being like completely on edge, the fear is not that you burn out, but that you get used to that feeling, and the intensity it kind of goes away, it becomes the new norm, and then you don't feel it. So the only way to maintain intensity for any amount of time is to have some of these valleys where you can give some relief and drop out of it. Comedy's a great vehicle for that, and Curry definitely is good at that, and it comes from the years and years of he and Cooper doing these sketches, because anyone who follows That's a Bad Idea sees that they don't just write their jokes as set up punchline. It's gonna make a turn at some point. It's gonna go somewhere uncomfortable or someplace that you didn't expect. And so yeah, they've really honed that skill.
I got to ask, obviously, in addition to screenwriting and things you're doing, you also have your own podcast. Tell me about your podcast that you're doing, and obviously,
Yeah.
I know that goes back into screenwriting, of course, as well. But tell me about your podcast.
Yes, the screenplay lab, where I take one screenplay and break it down. And, it's never anything negative, because, the fact that a screenplay exists in the world, has been produced into a movie, is a miracle. It's always like, what is interesting about this screenplay? What's unique? What can we learn from it? Because the screenplay itself is a piece of art. And so, the screenwriter has to teach the reader every single time how to read their individual screenplay. It's not like you pick up a novel and you already know, okay, this is how I read a novel, but there's different language in the screenplay, the way we use white space. And so it takes, 3 or 4 pages to sort of figure out, okay, this is how it's going to be done in this screenplay. And so it comes from the place of me, when I first started screenwriting, and I felt so isolated here, so far from LA, and I was reading these screenplays all the time anyway, and I thought, in fact, Curry even encouraged me. He's like, "You should do something, a podcast or something about it, some videos." And so I just, went on there and made one, and I made another one, and a couple of people caught on and started watching it. But for the probably the first 8 or 9, maybe 10 episodes, hardly anyone cared. I mean, nobody was watching it. And what I noticed though was that every time I broke a screenplay down to that, because to do the podcast, I mean, I really spent a lot of time like digging deep into the screenplay. And that level of breaking down screenplay was elevating my own writing. And so to me, that was the payoff. And so once I stopped caring if anyone watched or anybody cared, it was more of an exercise for me to break down a screenplay so severely that I could put this podcast together. And then I had already told myself I was going to do it, and so that I would do it and put it out in the world. And I didn't care if people watched or not. And then that's when it actually started picking up. And then, of course, with Obsession, people are finding it for the first time, and I'm making a lot of great connections through that.
Absolutely. I was going to say, you took the words right out of my mouth because I'm a professional writer myself. I'm a journalist, and I know like reading other great writing pushes me to become a better writer. Yeah, I'm sure you talking about screenplays, breaking down screenplays. Oh, and like you figure things out in your own screenplays.
Absolutely, because you learn different tricks, different ways of doing things. For example, I know that over doing the screenplay breakdowns, I've found montages. I found over 32 different ways that you could do a montage, and there's probably many more, but so far I've found 32 different ways that you could do a montage on the page. And so I found, just by doing that, it's helped me with my own writing to see what I think works in certain situations for me and what doesn't work. And I never would have discovered that. Even if I'd read all those screenplays, I wouldn't have discovered it because there's a difference between casually reading and actively reading with a pen, in a notepad, and you're just sort of breaking everything down. So it was sort of an accidental gift that I stumbled into that because it's really helped my writing.
Absolutely. Jeff, we have to talk about Obsession. Obviously, the huge success this weekend. Such a rare feat for a film to have a bigger second weekend than its first weekend. I think that speaks to the word of mouth. And I know we joked, we did our Obsession review last week, and I said, Curry Barker's 26. Does he make me feel completely unaccomplished in my own career? My God, doing this at such a young age. Have you been blown away by like? I mean, obviously beyond like working on the film, but like you knew this was a good script. You knew it was a good film. But hey, lots of good films get made and people don't see them. There's a reality there, right? This film is now, I mean, it's absolutely blown up. I think it's like 55 million over 2 weekends. Crazy, crazy. Have you been blown away by the reception just in 2 weeks of this film being out in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I never underestimate Curry, and I knew that it was going to be a great movie. And I've been there all along the way from script to production and seen all the cuts, and so I really wish I could experience it again for the first time, like everyone else, because you can never go back. And I've seen it, some variation of it, probably 30 or 40 times now. But yeah, I think none of us could have ever imagined that it would be sort of a cultural phenomenon, that it would catch word of mouth fire the way it has. Like it's just we're so grateful. It's such a gift, and it just doesn't happen very often. And it really resonates with people. But no, I mean, to be honest, when we were shooting this movie, it's such a low budget and over 20 days, and it was so difficult to get all the stuff that had to be done in such a short time. And we really didn't talk much about results. We knew it would exist somewhere in the world. We sort of fantasized that maybe we could see it in a theater at some point, not even a full theatrical run. But I remember a conversation I had specifically with Curry where I said, if this thing can get, ends up on Netflix or something and it gets, 7 showings in 7 cities across the country, I'll drive to Atlanta or Chicago, wherever, just to experience sitting in a theater, seeing it one time on a screen. And he was like, yeah, that would be unreal to see this on screen. And then now to know it's in theater screens all over the world, every 3 hours, it's like, it's mind blowing. It is absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally going to be one of the biggest movies of the year. And here you guys were in pre-production and production going, oh, it'd be cool if like maybe Netflix will say yes to it. Now Netflix is going to beg to
Yeah.
have it stream on their site. I'm curious in the process, since you were there for kind of everything with Obsession, did you see an earlier cut that maybe had an I don't want to say just I know there are differences like with the ending, we'll get to that. We'll talk about that, but like was there an overall different tone in some of the earlier cuts? Was there a different like fully like mechanical or thematic play? I mean, I imagine with such an indie film, it's got to stay pretty tight to what you shot. Was there a drastic different version of this movie?
Well, not really as far as tone goes. I mean, it's been very consistent with the tone, but with every first cut, the movie is like, 2.5 hours long, and then you just have to start whittling it down, killing your darlings, like Stephen King says, but, from a filmmaking standpoint, not just writing. But no, there's a lot of changes along the way. The screenplay leaked and is now online. And, I was looking at that last night and remembering like, the beginning is very different and they shot that beginning that is in the screenplay. And there's some really cool monologues in there that really dig deeper into the theme about romance versus love and what the difference is and why it matters. But at the end of the day, it was really about pacing because you've got to like grab people and keep their attention and keep them on the edge of their seat. You got to get to that inciting incident. It was all about how quickly can we get to the breaking the one wish willow and still have enough character development to where you care about these characters. You're not going through the motions. And in the beginning, it was taking too long to get there. And so it was hard to like cut some of that awesome stuff out, but it made the film so much better once you start doing that. It's a process for every film. Curry's going through it now with Anything But Ghosts. Riley, my other son, was the daily editor of that. So like every day they would the DIT would send over all the dailies and all of the material, and then Riley would do a rough cut so that Curry could see all that edited together. And then by the end of the movie, they had a full rough cut of the entire movie, and it was like 3.5 hours long. But that's on purpose too, because Riley would hold these long cuts, knowing that Curry would go back so he could more easily edit it where he wanted it, and because it's always easier to take stuff away than to go and add stuff back in. But yeah, so we're going through all that again now, and Curry's just chomping at the bit to get back to editing that movie because he had to take a break and really had just barely gotten started until he started, with this press tour and everything.
It's crazy. I remarked we were talking about the press tour for this, and I was like seeing the reaction to him, and I saw, I think it was right after somebody got cast for Anything But Ghosts, but I think it was Aaron Paul posted. He's like, "I've had such a blast working on this film. I want to work with Curry like the rest of my career," and I'm
Yeah.
like, 26 years old, and like
Yeah.
Aaron Paul is like multi-time Emmy winning. I was a huge Breaking Bad guy, and I'm just like, what an impact to have. And you mentioned like, it's a family affair. Like you got, like, it's kind of crazy. Like everyone, like it really is a family affair. Like everyone working on these films.
It really is. Well, Curry's just so generous, and so he wants everybody to rise up together. He knows how important this is to me, and he's always included me, and we have a great relationship. And I'm just so thankful, for every opportunity that he's given me. People see that, people find out about me. They see I'm a screenwriter. Some of them, without actually doing the research, like, oh, that makes sense. He's a Nepo baby. But if they really saw, no, I'm the Nepo dad. I'm the one who gets the opportunities because of Curry. And yeah, he's including me along the way. I was a script consultant on the film, wrote some of the monologues in the film, which he's made public, and that's really helped my career. And then also I'm in the film. I do the voiceover for the DJ, which you can only hear me in Dolby. Like we listen to the Dolby, you can hear everything I say, which is really interesting because all the trivia questions are about genies and wishes. There's a question about Aladdin. But then when I listen to it in my local theater, it's just roar, 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 roar. So I'm the roar, roar, roar guy. And then I do a background. I'm a background actor in the castle's music, so that's kind of cool. But then, yeah, and his mom designed the One Wish Willow, which is amazing. And his younger brother Riley was a camera operator. He's the one that's helping with the editing and anything but goes. He's a tremendous cinematographer. He's only 22, and his talent so far ahead of his age. And then Jeffrey, my oldest son, he worked as a production assistant on the film, and just one of these guys that will do anything. You don't even have to ask him; he just figures it out and goes and does it. So yeah, it really is a family affair. It's wild. But you were talking about Aaron Paul, and that was like that was amazing. I mean, he is such a great guy. I mean, I talked to him for hours on set, and he just he makes everybody in the room feel important and relevant. He's figured it out, how to turn that. He knows he's a star. He knows people are like staring at him and interested in it, but he's lived in that space for so long. It seems like his way of coping with it is to turn that around and be interested in you, make you the star. But it doesn't come across as a game or manipulative. It's totally genuine. He's an outstanding individual. And then Bryce Dallas Howard was just like such a pro. I mean, she's been in the business since she was born, and she's a tremendous director. And Curry was intimidated by having such an established director there, but she made him feel like like he was the greatest director ever. And she really was wanted to be in his movie, wanted to service him and his vision, and it was just such a beautiful thing the way I can't wait for people to see anything but Ghost. And then Violet McGraw, she's as far as horror goes, she's like a superstar, a child actor, and like her talent is also years and years ahead of its time because of just her experience and her emotional depth. And then of course Curry Cooper. And then that was the most amazing thing was, of course, I'm Cooper Tomlinson, president of his fan club. That's what I tell him all the time. He calls me his number one hype man because I'm always just pulling him aside and just telling him how awesome that take was. And it's true because he delivers. He's so talented. And but for me, truly, as a dad, my greatest pleasure is just watching Curry captain that ship, because everybody was looking at him and it's like, what do we do? And this was a full production with, hundreds of people as opposed to Obsession, which was very small. And then on top of that, he had to go and get in front of the camera and act. And that's a whole other level of difficulty. And he pulled it off. And it was just like a beautiful thing to watch.
I love it.
That's going to be exciting for people. Anything but Ghosts coming out next year, right? It's
No,
slated to
they were
release.
talking really early next year, but I don't know now with Obsession what that'll
Yeah, they
do.
might want to give it some more breathing room.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask a question from our patrons. This is from Joe Reynolds. As someone who helped mentor Curry creatively, what advice did you give him while making Obsession?
Hmm. Um, well, let's see. I'm trying to think about from Obsession. So we talked a lot about like, sticking to his vision and being true to his vision, and like, and also being open to collaborators and contribution. Is that he's really good at that anyway. But and also too, we talked a lot about just like trying to be the calmest guy in the room. Like, you're setting the emotional tone of everybody in the room. And when things start to elevate, you got to go the opposite direction. And he's really good at that. But we talked about that a lot. But Curry and I mean, he started making films and stuff and acting in front of the camera when he was, 7, 8 years old. Just like, he would drag everybody in the neighborhood to make videos. His 10th birthday party was a movie party where we invited everybody to the park, and I handed out scripts to everybody and had my camera and a boom mic, and we made a movie. That was the party. And when that was over, we ate cake. And for Curry, that was a good time, rather than going to the skating rink or the jump house or whatever. So, he is young at 26, and but he's just been at it for a long time.
Um, this is another question that comes from Matthew Scott Kane, who himself is a very accomplished showrunner. He wanted to know, as a father of one of Gen Z's biggest new voices in horror, what have you observed about how your son takes the world around him in, and how his own personal journey in your home may have influenced his perspective as a horror storyteller?
Mhm. Well, the way he takes the world in, is he pays attention. He has ADHD, so he hyper focuses and fixates on things. People think ADHD is a lack of focus and attention, but it's actually too much focus and attention. And
Yes.
it's a disorder if it happens in a way that makes your life more difficult, or you have trouble with, relationships and stuff. But his ADHD is sort of a gift. So if he locks in on something, he's able to like really see it from three different angles, four different angles, and he remembers everything, and it shows up later in his writing and in his work. And so he's really learned how to dissect the human condition. And then the second part of that question, he was asking about things that happened when he was in his childhood. Well, I think. Oh, well, one thing is that Curry was not really into sports that much. He played soccer later in high school, but like in middle school, early high school years, he didn't really want to play baseball, basketball, football, any of that. And his brothers did, and I didn't want him to feel left out. So we together established our own extracurricular activity, which was we were going to go to the movies every Wednesday, no matter what, even if that fell on some other brother's activity, so that he would know what he was interested in was just as important. And so, I'd pick him up from school on Wednesday. We'd go to the movies, and in our town where we were, it was just 8 screens. So, you'd run out of stuff. You'd see stuff you wouldn't normally want to go see, musicals, just things that weren't made for him or me. But seeing those movies were the ones that helped us the most, because we weren't just sitting back being like, entertain me, make me laugh, make me smile, make me scared. So with that gone, we were able to really dig into the mechanics of it, like what is making this work, what's the arc, and especially at that age, Curry was really interested in the cinematography and the lighting. And then afterwards, we would go and have dinner, just the two of us, and we'd break it down and we'd talk about what we liked and what we didn't like and what we saw, what was different about it. And so really, like he jokes that we, had our own little film school. And in some ways, I think that's true. And I think it's made a big impact.
I love hearing that. I love hearing that. I've been kind of building towards this because obviously Obsession's out in the world now, and I want to make sure our audience knows full spoilers here. So if you haven't seen Obsession, which you should, incredible film. But if you haven't, be aware. My next question is 100% going to spoil the movie. So be aware.
Okay.
So it's funny when Patrick reached out, and I was like, "Oh yeah, of course." Literally weirdest timing ever. I just made a graphic for our Instagram page where Curry talked about the ending of Obsession and like what changed from like his original vision to that, and he talked about his dad. He's like, "My dad came to me and told me." So originally, again, full spoilers for anyone out there. Originally, Curry had said that the end of the movie was going to be that Nikki was going to come out of the one wish will, come out of the haze, or come out of the whatever she was in, and the end of the movie was going to be her taking her own life. And he said very pointedly, he's like, my dad actually said, actually, I think having her alive, having her live with the trauma of that is much scarier, is much more impactful. And he's like, oh, you're so right. So let me just ask you, like, kind of the broad spectrum of that question. Like, walk me through that entire process, because, like I said, when Patrick reached out, I was like, I literally just talked about Curry's dad influenced the end of this movie. And by the way, I love the ending that we got. Like, that hit me because I was talking about in the podcast, like, she wakes up, she's screaming in terror, and boom, credits. I was like, oh my, like, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. So walk me through that entire process of, like, because like I said, very pointedly, he said, that was my dad. Like, my dad said, like, you should not have her take her own life. Have her alive. That's much more terrifying. And I was like, yeah, dad was right. Dad was right.
Well, thanks. Yeah, well, the horror now is that she has all three of her friends are dead, and there's $1 billion in the house down the street, and she's, like, I mean, what is she gonna do? And in fact, Curry's already said this, so I can say it publicly. In Anything But Ghosts, there's a TV in the background, and it talks about a triple homicide that's being investigated. So it's sort of like a little Easter egg that has nothing to do with the movie, but that's really cool. Yeah, the process was, he wrote that she would end herself, and that was always going to be the ending. And I always had a problem with it. And it was one of these things where I was constantly coming to him about it, saying, I think that this isn't fair to the viewer to put them through this with Nikki and then for her to not survive this. Like, it's too much. But in Curry's defense, he wanted this to have the most brutal possible ending that he could. Like, he wanted to pull no punches, and that's Curry's style. Like, never is he gonna like take the easy way out or pull any punches, and so that's why he wanted that ending. And then they shot it, and so they brought in practical effects and did it, and it was like awesome. I mean, it was one of the best I've ever seen because it's so real. It's not like a Hollywood splatter thing. It was real, and everybody was so fired up about it. And to Curry's credit, they were about to move on, and Curry, I think maybe just hearing my voice in the back of his head, and not just me, other people too. He's like, okay, well, let's just, since we're here, let's just do one where she doesn't do that and see how it happens. And then also to Indy's credit, because I think she also believed that because she's embodied this character and she truly understands Nikki in a way that none of the rest of us do. She knew Nikki wouldn't do that. That Nikki's, a strong person, a brave person. She was being brutalized this whole time and assaulted, and now is her one chance to have some autonomy. She wouldn't do that. And so it rang more true to Indy. So that's why she gave that killer performance. And then once that happened and Curry said cut, he knew then that that was the ending. No one had to convince him. He knew. So it all worked out. And you're right, it is the best ending. This movie, I don't think would be getting the amount of word of mouth and excitement that it is with the other ending, even just being just as good. Because it's brutal to see, and it also clarifies a lot of questions about the story too. Without any exposition or explaining, you see clearly that Nikki has come back into her body and she's looking around at the devastation. So you understand, okay, she wasn't really there except for the few times where she popped in and popped out. So yeah, it definitely works.
And I'm not kidding when I say this. If Indy never really doesn't get like an Oscar nomination, it's a travesty. She is so. And by the way, not knocking anyone else's performances. Everyone's great in this movie, but her performance is off the charts.
Yeah, yeah, she's amazing. And the process that Curry went through to get Nikki, I mean, it was really extensive. And I know that's not unique, but I think he auditioned way more people than most because he knew, and Skylar Zern, who's the casting director, they both knew that this movie lives and dies with Nikki. I mean, this performance is so incredibly important. And Curry had a vision always that this person would be able to basically on a dime perform two people. And that was the hard part. He would share with me some of all of the casting. And so every night I would look at them after the fact, and there would be some women who were just so good at the natural part, like being a really good actor and being like the perfect Gen Z independent woman. But then they would really struggle with the horror part of it, and then vice versa. There'd be women who could really pull that off, but they weren't really quite as lovable or believable in the other way. And then toward the end, there were several who were very good, but then when Indy auditioned, it was pretty obvious that she was the one. And I agree, to even imagine that this movie would have an Academy Award nomination or Golden Globe Award nomination or any of the big awards, it's hard to even allow myself to fantasize about that. Just like it was hard to allow myself to fantasize that this would get picked up at TIFF and be a theatrical release worldwide. So it is possible, but it's going to take a lot of magic to get it there because there's so many months between now and award season, and to keep that that to be relative for that long is really hard. The good thing is that Focus has done this before, very recently, is in 10 months ago. So they know how to do it, and so I hope she's there. I'd love to see the screenplay be nominated. I'd love to see Curry be nominated, but um, Indy is just like there's no doubt that this performance is one for the ages, and she's going to be a mega star. I think they all are going to be mega stars. I was talking to someone the other day about like when this movie ages, where it is kind of like how where Hereditary is now, 10, 15 years from now, and there's a new generation of people discovering it. And the Gen Z or like the older generation are saying, you got to watch this movie. I can't believe you haven't watched it. And when the new generation watches this movie, I believe they're going to say, I can't believe these four actors were all in this movie. Like these four megastars were all in this movie together because I think they're all going to go on to just do amazing things.
I think that is definitely true. I mean, it's a real accomplishment, and I know it takes so much trial and error. Like we get the final product, the viewing public gets the final product, but there's so many choices made, so many lines cut that change the shape of a movie entirely. And I think this movie succeeds in both what it says and what it lets you come up with. I think that there's such a lesson to be taken from that with this movie where it's like sometimes you do withhold information and you leave it to the audience and it has a great impact. One last question from the Patreons. Kieran Charette asks, what tools helped you with screenwriting classes, apps, techniques, teachers, etc., things like that? We do have a lot of aspiring filmmakers ourselves, so those tips would be very helpful.
Yeah. Well, I didn't really go the book route. Well, actually, I did read a couple of books, and I don't really know how much they helped me, but you know, the most important thing is reading screenplays. And, if you really want to be a screenwriter, you have to take it seriously. It's not like sitting on the beach, reading a novel and, having a good time sipping on a beer or whatever. Like this needs to be your scheduled time, X amount of hours a day or a week that you're going to be reading a screenplay, taking notes on it, figuring out what works for you, what doesn't work, story structure, character arcs. But I would say, as far as resources, the one that's helped me the most has been the podcast Script Notes with John August and oh, I came on blanking on the guy's name. I love this guy so much. But the two screenwriters there, Craig Mazin.
Yeah.
Yeah, that has been a real wealth of information. Not, some from a craft standpoint, but also from an industry and professional standpoint. And they have really great writers that come on the show, and just that combination of all those things. I feel like it's really given me a pretty strong education. I usually listen to about 3 episodes a week, their current episode, and then two old ones. Working my way back. And I look forward to hopefully meeting those guys one day and just telling them, how much they've meant to me. But not just me. I know it's a lot of people that feel that way. And they just came out with a book. The book's very helpful. But for me, the podcasts were very, very helpful. So I would recommend that for any up and coming screenwriter.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, we can't say thank you enough for spending so much time with us. Obviously, congrats on all the success for you and Curry and the entire family on Obsession. It's still kicking ass and taking names in the theater. Huge weekend once again. Incredible accomplishment, and obviously looking forward to anything but goes. We didn't even mention Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We are big Texas
Can't
Chainsaw
believe
Massacre.
it.
Yeah, we are
We're
big
big.
Texas Chainsaw. Yeah, so we are
Yeah.
very excited for that as well. I know he's got there's a lot of time between now and then, but I cannot. So Texas Chainsaw is gonna be a lot of fun. I have a feeling.
Yeah, so you're so real for that because most people want to just skip right over Ghost and start talking about Chainsaw because it's such a beloved IP. And I was really scared and worried at first because I do know that, so many people are going to go into Chainsaw with their own personal connection to the material, that they watched the original Chainsaw Massacre, at their grandmother's house on the couch or with their girlfriend at the theater holding her hand. Like there's an emotional connection and it's like, okay, well, this better be good. Show me what you got. But after seeing the reception to Obsession, I feel like it's not going to be a problem. People get Curry. They understand. They're interested, and he's not going to make everybody happy, but he's going to put out a banger of a movie. So I'm excited for that too.
Is
Do
there
you, do
any?
you, do, I was gonna, do
Go
you
ahead.
remember the first time you showed him Texas Chainsaw Massacre? 'Cause you
No,
said, do
he
you remember that?
yeah. He saw it all. He snuck and saw it. No, yeah, he wasn't supposed to see that one yet, and then when we finally got around to see, he's like, "Oh, I saw that like last year." Yeah, he
That's a good
told that
horror fan
story
right
how
there.
he snuck behind our backs and saw that, and then and also The Ring too. He was like hiding behind the couch while we were watching The Ring, and had no idea. I'm glad I wasn't being naughty or anything.
Is there any little nuggets? Obviously, it's still a ways away. He's got anything but ghosts to focus on right now. But is are there any little nuggets that you've already seen or heard? I know you can't give anything away, but on the Texas Chainsaw side, where you're like, oh
Mhm.
boy, this is gonna
Yeah,
trip people out.
yes, but I can't talk about it.
We'll talk offline, Jeff,
Yeah.
off the record.
No, I already have an NDA. I can't talk about any of it.
Well, Jeff,
But
again,
no,
thank you so much.
it's gonna be good. You know, it's gonna be exciting. It's gonna be very like psychological. You know, which is what
Great.
and people who love Curry, that's what they love. So it's not gonna just be a regular slasher, but it's also gonna be true to the original. It's not gonna be, you know, people like, oh, this isn't even Texas Chainsaw. It'll still feel like it.
I can't wait. I can't wait. Well, Jeff, thank you again for doing this. We really do appreciate it. Hopefully, you want to come back and see us again. Obviously, you're going to be busy with your podcast, the screenplays you're doing, obviously, working with Curry and Cooper and all the other kids. So, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. Congratulations again on all the success with Obsession and continued success. Because we're talking 2 weeks in. I can only imagine what we're going to be saying about 6 weeks in. So, look forward to that. So, thank you again for doing this. We really appreciate it. And, like I said, come back and see us again sometime in the future.
I'd love to. Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jeff.
Absolutely.